Okay, you're good.
Are we recording?
Yep,
Okay,
recording right now. I'll be checking in a few minutes.
All right, sounds good. All right, how you doing, guys? Okay, here we are again. Okay, and we're talking about Stalin and the Cold War. Okay, and Khrushchev today. So we'll get started. First of all, I want to show you what they're issuing in Monmouth County for COVID-19 protection. This is what I'm wearing when I go shopping in the Acme. Not really. It's a World War II Russian gas mask, okay? Believe it or not, it actually is, okay? It's actually got some Russian writing here on this cylinder containing, I don't know, whatever it contain, I don't know, purification air, whatever it might be. A couple things now, some instructions first of all, okay? One is paper number 3 is due Thursday. It won't be marked late, but marked late after that. Guys, there's a couple of people here that haven't done any papers, okay? All right, you're not going to pass this course, all right? And I don't want them in at the end of the course. All right, you've had time to get them done, get them done. I sent an email out to you this morning. 83% of you have at least one quiz you haven't done. So just realize that's you got to fulfill your obligations here, guys. Okay, you really do. All right, for this course to succeed. None of us wanted it to be an online course, but this is what we're faced with. Okay, so please do that. I apologize to the people that send in their quizzes so quick on Friday. Sometimes I read them as a late quiz from the previous week, so I grade them, say, late. Okay, all right. Grace and Michaela, you guys marked them late. I didn't mean to. I've corrected the quiz on your in the grade book. All right. Essays. You're doing bracket 3 for Thursday. Okay, select an essay there. All right, and you have to do Stalin now from all 3 phases of Stalin's rule. I'll talk about that in just a minute. All right, but you can now take a look. Some of you are down in numbers here. Some of you are getting late penalties. You get 5 points off for a late paper. Okay, you may want to do an extra paper from any of the essays from bracket A, B, or C. Any of the ones you can do. Okay, there you can do an extra credit one. Just when you send it to me, mark it down as extra credit so I know what I'm grading there. Okay, all right. Canvas. We get a lot of heat about not putting stuff on Canvas. A lot of professors don't like it. I don't like it either. All right, and it doesn't average grades the way we want them to grade it to do that. All right, so guys, disregard Canvas. I had to put some on there because it's getting some flack from the administration. Disregard it. Okay. On May 1st, I'm going to give you what you owe, what you've done. You'll be able to check it. Okay. I'll share my grade book with you in that sense. But also too. What I did put on the Canvas was the point total of your first 2 papers and of your first 6 quizzes. Okay, so when I put 7, might have been 7 quizzes. Okay, all right, that's what those point totals are. All right, forget the average. I don't know how they arrive at that average. Okay, so at any rate, guys, disregard it. Don't get clutched up when you see a bad grade on there. You'll hear from me, and you can always call me too. Say, Mr. Trimble, how am I doing? I'll give you. I'll recite to you the grade book, exactly what you owe. It'll take me 30 seconds. Okay, so no problem. In the mail, you received an essay on the Cold War. You need to read that. I will not spend as much time on the Cold War as I would have in class. I would have given you the same essay anyway. All right, so you got to read that. Okay, all right. And secondly, you also got the final exam. Now you don't do anything with that yet. But I sent it out to, kind of minimize my mailing costs, what I did. So that's all that is. All right. Handout booklet. What are we looking at here? What pages? Okay. First of all, the page we're going to focus on initially here is page number 50, From Stalin's Russia to Stalin's World. Okay. So I'm going to stop the video right now so you make sure you have your handout booklet, okay, because I want to make sure, okay, that we're recording here and things like that. Go get your booklets and return.
Yep, you've done
We're good?
4 minutes, yep.
Okay. All right. Page 50, okay? 3 phases of Stalin's rule, all right? When you answer the essay on Stalin in bracket C, all right, you got to include all 3 phases. The 1930s, which he rises to power and consolidates. At the time of the Great Terror, time of the Great the purges and everything else, the collectivization, the Ukrainian famine, all that stuff. Then you got to look at his leadership in World War II, wartime conferences, moving the industry eastward so it stays out of the hands of the Germans. All right, and then phase 3 is this one. And this is the one, this phase 3, the beginning of the Cold War, that gets the least attention in history books. Okay, Stalin's still alive, until I was born, believe it or not. He didn't die until 1953, and I was born in 49. So there's a phase here, about 8 years, in which he sets the stage for the post-war world. Okay? All right. So include all three of those in there. We start off with the 1945, the Potsdam Conference. Potsdam Conference, okay, was the first time the new big three met. It was no longer FDR, Churchill, and Stalin. It was now Stalin, Clement Attlee, who had replaced Churchill, and Harry Truman, who had replaced FDR. All right? And a couple things happen there. One is it becomes apparent that Stalin is not going to remove his troops from Eastern Europe. World War II. Russia pushes the Germans out of Russia and then into Eastern Europe, okay, and into Germany, and they liberate Berlin. Well, what about all those countries in between? Now, these are what they call the Eastern Bloc nations, the satellite nations. I want you to remember these countries. I'll say them slowly, okay? Poland, run right down the map. East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, okay? They will be occupied by Red Army troops, and those Red Army troops will stay there, okay? They're not going to go home. You know, when we occupied, we swept across France and Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, West Germany. Did we stay there and occupy them? Did we conquer those territories and take them over? No, okay? We give them back to the people. Stalin didn't do that. He kept those troops there, and he made it clear at Potsdam, we ain't going away. We're staying there. This is going to be a key factor in this coming Cold War. The presence of the Eastern European bloc nations being satellites of Russia. This is something Russians have wanted since the time of Peter the Great, a buffer zone between themselves and Western Europe. All right, well, they've got it and they're not letting it go. The second thing that occurs at Potsdam is Stalin went back to his promise about entering the war against Japan, which was still raging. Okay, it's May of 1945, and the fighting is going on in Okinawa. All right, Harry Truman receives a message, a secret coded message, that the atomic bomb has been tested and it works. We don't need Russia in World War II anymore. In fact, we don't want them there. We don't want them coming into Eastern Europe. All right, into East Asia. Well, they do attack, as you know, we talked about a little bit in the last lecture, okay, and they'll come pouring across the border into Manchuria on August 8th and August 9th. We dropped the second atomic bomb on Nagasaki, in part to block them from gaining further territory. In other words, they could have done in East Asia, Mongolia, China, even Japan and Sakhalin Island, but particularly Korea, what they did in Eastern Europe, and hold on to that territory. We don't want that. So we don't need them there. The Cold War is beginning here. You're starting to see Truman and Stalin go head to head, and they both bear responsibility for the breakup of this alliance in World War II that'll become the breakup of the Grand Alliance and the onset of the Cold War. Well, let's go through these years now, okay? You got some self-explanatory stuff. You got a famine in the Ukraine again, okay? Soldiers coming home from war, they don't want to go on to collective farms. So many Russian horses are dead from the war, okay? There's no horsepower, okay, that sort of thing. Believe it or not, I'm still using that, okay? So the big thing here is this thing called the Marshall Plan, which was a proposal by the United States Secretary of State, George Marshall, very good individual. And we're going to give massive amounts of money to Western Europe to rebuild in the wake of the devastation of World War II. There's some 20 million DPs, displaced persons, wandering around. Cities are in rubble, okay, all right? And we will spend money on these countries to rebuild them. Part of the agenda is communism thrives in economically depressed areas. Think about that. All right. If we can build up the economies of Western Europe, we can prevent the expansion of communism into those areas. That's part of it too. Well, the Russians reject that. It's a $13 billion aid package they rejected. All right. They will form their own later on, called ComEcon. You can see it further down the sheet. That's Russia's assistance to Eastern Europe. They're going to link their economies to Eastern Europe. We can do more than that with Eastern Europe. It's called Stalinization. Stalin's going to set up the model that he used in the Soviet Union. One-party dictatorial rule, a state run by the secret police, collectivization of farms, emphasis on heavy industry and the military, okay? It's just like miniature Russia in where? Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, okay? Stalinization. Well, in 1948, we have the first of three Berlin crises. The first Berlin crisis is when Stalin, and you have this on your essay, so you need to look at it. All right, Stalin, for some reason, shuts down the access to West Berlin. Now, here's what you have to take a look at. If you picture a map of Europe, and after our next break, I'm going to have you go get one. All right, look at a map of Europe. Google it if you have to. Okay, all right, Germany was divided up in 1945 between four areas. Okay, there was the British sector, the American sector, and the French sector, and the Russian sector. The British, French, and American sectors were fused together. Okay, they called it West Germany. The eastern sector was Russia. They held on to it. That's part of those satellite nations. Within the Russian eastern sector was the city of Berlin. It was an eye in the storm. It was basically a city in which half the city, West Berlin, was run by the Russians, the British, and the French. Okay, all right, and it was an open city. You could leave through there if you were in anywhere here in Russia, in Poland, in East Germany. All right, by 1980, the 1980s, okay, some 4 million people had fled. No, by 1961, excuse me, 4 million people had fled. Okay, through this portal of freedom to get to the West. Or get to the United States, to West Berlin at least, but, and also to France and England, etc. East Germany was hemorrhaging people. We're going to have to deal with that, okay? That's something to fear later on. That's going to be the second Berlin crisis. So I'm running ahead of myself here, and I apologize. First Berlin crisis is Stalin shuts that city down, the West Berlin. Why? I think he just wanted to test the reaction by the Americans and the British and the French. See if we're just a paper tiger. See if we're going to simply appease and let things happen, let things slide like we did with Adolf Hitler. Well, Harry Truman could have responded with World War III, but he doesn't. He sends in the Berlin airlift and drops tons of supplies, 24/7, into the city of Berlin. Stalin will lift the blockade. It was a test. He also established this Commie-Con in response to the Marshall Plan I just spoke about. Okay. In the meantime, NATO is formed in Western Europe. Okay. Now NATO, all right, was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That's the United States' alliance with Western Europe: England, France, Iceland, Finland, not Finland, but Spain, things like this, Turkey even. Okay. All right. That same year, Russians are going to respond to that. I'll get to it. That same year, the Russians are going to explode their first atomic bomb. Atomic bomb. We no longer have a monopoly on atomic weaponry. This puts the fear in everybody's boots. Okay, all right? It involves spies. The Rosenberg spy case trial. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg were caught sending supplies, sending secrets to the Russians, at least Julius was, and they were executed. The only husband and wife team we ever executed in American history. By the way, their children, interestingly enough, for a while were in the Toms River school system. That's true. Okay, all right. Later on, they enrolled up in New York City. 1950, and I don't want to gloss over this atomic bomb. That's a huge thing. The Russians get that. Okay, but 1950, the Korean War kicks in. Now, the cause of the Korean War, as you know, okay, North Korea communists invade South Korea to try to unify the entire peninsula under communist rule. Was he back with the North Korean communists backed by the Stalinist communists? Yes, they were. Okay, but there's an interesting story here that I want you to be aware of, and you don't often read this. All right, Stalin could have stopped this. See, the troops sent into Korea. Watch the TV show MASH. If the troops sent into Korea were under the UN flag, any action taken by the UN then and now could be vetoed by one of the 5 nations in the Security Council. And that was Russia, the United States, Germany, Russia, United States, France, England, and China. All right, they could veto that. So if a proposal comes before the UN to send troops into South Korea to stop this invasion, okay, a UN police action as they called it, right? Russia could have said, nope, not going to do it, and veto it. Why didn't they? Well, they didn't because the Russian ambassador wasn't there that day. He had stormed out over the non-payment of debts, something like this, the non-payment of dues, I should say. All right. Well, there's some evidence surfaced recently that Stalin told him, don't go there that day. Let that war happen. Let the United States get tied down in an East Asian land war so we can have a free reign in Eastern Europe against Berlin and against the NATO forces, etc., if it ever comes to war. All right. Interesting interpretation. It makes some sense. You don't often read that. Okay. All right. What you often read is that the Soviet ambassador who wasn't there that day made a huge mistake. He bungled. He'd probably taken out and shot. Well, maybe not. Okay. There's another way to look at that. Well, 1950 to 53, Stalin is enduring health crises. He's born back in 1879, I believe. All right. And he's riven by arthritis, diminished by raging arterial sclerosis, dazed by fainting spells, embarrassed by failing memory, tormented by sore gums and false teeth. He's become unpredictable, paranoid, and angry. Cursed old age has caught up with me, he muttered, and he was more than restless than usual. He's beginning to return to his old ways. He's thinking about purges again. All right? He hasn't been after the Jews yet. He starts in on them, arresting them and things like this. All right? He hadn't been after he went after the Leningrad party apparatus, okay, after somebody criticized him. He purged them and had them shot, okay? All right? And he's thinking about going after the doctors. Now, many times the doctors are linked to the Jews because they were Jewish doctors, okay? But at any rate, don't mess with the doctors, because if you're not well, they're the ones who prescribe the medicine. And if they want to get rid of you, they can prescribe the wrong medicine, or too much of it, or not enough of it. They have your life in their hands, and he's going after the doctors now. It's called the doctor's plot. For years it was rumored. Okay, now we know it to be true. Okay, they did get him. We found smoking gun evidence of this, right? Things like that. But at any rate, guys, before we go any further, listen to this 2013 public opinion poll as we finally put Stalin to rest. When did he die? He died on March 5th, 1953. Okay, all right. Among the great historical figures, as assessed in Russia in 2013, Lenin received a 37% people rating. Okay, Marx was only 4%, but he wasn't Russian. He'd never even been to Russia. Peter the Great was up there, 37%. All right, Pushkin, the great poet, was up there, 29%. The top of the list with a 49% approval rating was Joseph Stalin. Think how the Russians see him. The guy who orchestrated the revival of Russia into superpower status, took on and defeated Nazi Germany, and now takes on and defeats, or takes on anyway, the United States, stands toe-to-toe with the United States in this coming Cold War. So, Stalin is dead. I want to point to a handout packet and a page that has an error, and it's a Freudian error, and I'll tell you why, okay? This page 50 that has Stalin's Russia to Stalin's world has 1950, Korean War begins, UN Security Council, doctor's plot, things I've talked about. And then it's got a date of 3-5-49. Remember I said Stalin died on March 5th, 1953? This was a typo by me, and I've left it in here because it's kind of funny. I swear this was not intentional, okay? But that's my birthday. I was born on March 5th, and in 53, I was my 4th birthday. Not that I remember it, okay? But that's the day Stalin died. Okay, so that I put that in there just because I would normally just write that out, okay? And it's just kind of an interesting Freudian slip. I leave it in there. If you turn to page 51, you'll see the origins of the Cold War, perceived expansion of communism, the arms race. The arms race is a big factor in this. The United States plays a role here. We wanted to keep the United States, keep our economy on a war footing at the end of World War II. Now, why do we want to do that? Okay, because you always have, after every war, a major recession. We had 11 million soldiers overseas, and they're coming home from the war now. They're looking for work. They're out of work, out of a job. The factories have to turn from producing tanks to household appliances. It's not an easy transition. Okay, so at any rate, if we can pick an enemy and keep ourselves on a war footing, we can keep the economy booming. This is what Eisenhower had spoke about when he left the White House, and he said, beware of the military-industrial complex. They serve their own ends, okay, and they will keep us going on a war footing when we don't need the weapon systems that they're saying we need, okay? Guys, by 1986, in this Cold War, This comes from George Creel. This sounds too fantastic a number to believe, but he wrote in his book, Charlie Wilson's War, each side was spending roughly $300 billion a year on new weaponry we would never use, and in part, the United States started that. Well, keep in mind, the personalities I talked about, that's a factor. The presence of the troops in Eastern Europe, that's a factor, okay, all right. The Berlin crises, the first one, that's a factor. Even the opening of a second front in World War II was a factor. Stalin wanted that second front open in 1943 when it was still touch and go on the Eastern Front. The Nazis weren't defeated yet. He needed help, and we didn't open up that front till 44. He saw that as part of a plot between FDR and Churchill to allow the Russians and Germans to annihilate each other in the Eastern Front. It's not true, okay, but that's Stalin's way of thinking, okay? So a lot of reasons for this Cold War, okay, all right? You have on there some of the causes of it, some of the interpretations, some of the lead members of it, okay? And as we go through the Cold War, you'll see these events unfold, but our next thing to take a look at is who's going to take over after Stalin, and that is going to be Nikita Khrushchev, and that's page 55. Nikita Khrushchev is an interesting guy. He's kind of the guy I grew up with in the 50s and 60s, okay, with him in power, and he embodied Russia, for good or bad. Old-time Communist Party member, joined the Communist Party in 1918. By 1937, he's in the Central Committee, which is like what's the Politburo later on. That's the highest element within the Communist Party. And when Stalin dies, he's one of the top 3 heir apparents. Who are the other 2? Okay, well, one is a non-entity. You have to remember his name. Neither one do you have to remember his name, actually. But one of them is a guy named Malenkov. Have you ever heard the old song by Billy Joel, We Didn't Light the Fire? Malenkov is mentioned on there, okay? He was seen to be the heir apparent, okay? All right, Stalin never designated a successor. Right? Khrushchev was right there. Khrushchev was a kind of right-hand man. He'd been involved in the purges, the collectivization, okay, all right, the political assassinations. He was a Stalinist, no question at all. And he admired the guy. He admired his style, all right? Well, what you have happening, too, is this guy, Lavrenti Beria. Beria was the head of the secret police, and this guy was a snake like you can't believe. Lavrenti Beria was more treacherous, more practiced in perfidy and cunning, more insolent and single-minded than Stalin ever was. Although Stalin was the primary engine behind the terror, Beria was its monster as well. He oversaw his initial quota. He oversaw it. He was given a quota of 270,000 arrests and 80,000 executions. No trial, just arrest people. Give me a number. He overshot them, okay, traditionally. Beria distinguished himself by personally performing the torture of one Communist Party's family, driving his widow mad by placing a snake in her cell and beating her teenage children to death in front of her eyes. He was a serial rapist who cruised the streets of Moscow in his black Zeal limousine, spotted young women and girls he wanted delivered to his Kochelov townhouse, okay, Kochelov Street townhouse, where he plied them with wine containing a sleeping potion and systematically raped them. All right. Well, this guy is going to be next in line. No, he doesn't. Khrushchev and Malenkov unify, basically speaking, and they're going to throw this guy out. Trump up some charges saying he's a German spy. Arrest him and shoot him. Good. The world gets rid of Lavrenti Beria. Okay. But what about Malenkov? Khrushchev wants the power. Okay. And in 1954, he's appointed first secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This is Stalin's old position of general secretary, all right? He's got that position now, and he orchestrates a group that's going to push, marginalize, okay, Grigory Malenkov. I believe that's his first name. He proposes almost immediately 2 things. One is taking the 5-year plans where you had the different quotas for factories and farms and extending them to 7 years. Not a bad idea. Okay, gives people more long-term planning, which is always a good thing. He also had regional councils here who would set the quotas rather than all coming from Moscow. That's a good thing. The other thing he proposed, and this was a stunning success, something called the Virgin Lands Program, where the lands out in Central Asia before you get to Siberian snow country, okay, was open prairie land, a lot like the American Midwest, but shallower soil. Okay, all right. This is Kazakh style. It was mainly for grazing of cattle and things like that, of sheep. All right. Khrushchev says, let's put this under the plow, see if we can grow wheat out here. And he triples the output of wheat in the first couple of years. Well, the problem with the shallow soil is like the American Midwest many times. If you don't take proper precautions against erosion and things like this, wind breaks, okay, to stop the wind from blowing the topsoil off, you're going to get a dust bowl like we had in the 1930s. That's what's ultimately going to happen to this Virgin Lands proposal. But initially, this helps put Khrushchev in power, okay? The Russian people can feed themselves now. 1955, the formation of the Warsaw Pact. That is Russia's alliance with Eastern Europe. NATO was America's alliance with Western Europe. You need to see those two as direct confrontational. He also proposes a doctrine known as separate roads to socialism. We don't always have to use the Stalinist mode. He rejects Stalinization of Eastern Europe. We want you to get to the socialist mode. We want you to get to the ultimate communist state, but you don't have to follow our lead. Well, you can do your own thing. Imre Nagy, I don't remember his name, in Hungary hears this. Wow, I can go my own way. This is typifying what people saw in Khrushchev's reign as the thaw. It wasn't going to be Stalin's mode again, okay? A thaw, an easier time in this kind of a spring thaw. Think of it that way, okay? All right? Kind of nice after a winter. We have a day like we have out there today. Okay, I'm broadcasting this on Sunday afternoon. 1956, he takes a step further, and this has profound consequences for the Soviet Union's history in the 20th century, remaining part of it. He announces before the 20th Party Congress what would later be called the secret speech. It's a complete denunciation of Joseph Stalin and his complete style. I have a text of it here. I'm not going to read that to you. But he basically denounces Stalin as the monster he was. Can you imagine being in the 20th Party Congress all that day and hearing this? People were gasping for, my God, what's he saying? Okay, all right. The story goes that an East Berlin Communist Party leader had a heart attack and died when he read the speech. Okay, all right. This is going to filter down to the lower ranks of the Communist Party, the lower cadres, and young people like Boris Yeltsin, Mikhail Gorbachev are going to hear this and say, wow, we don't have to follow Stalinism anymore? Stalinism is rejected. Later on, Khrushchev said, I could hear the voices of the people that were killed during the purges crying out to me. It was a cathartic moment for him, almost like kind of self-cleansing in a lot of ways, all right? So at any rate, guys, the secret speech, profoundly consequential. It's also going to lead to the Sino-Soviet rift in part. Now, there's other things involved in that. But Sino meaning China, Soviet meaning Russian, they had been communist allies. They split apart. Mao Zedong, leader of communist China, absolutely adored Joseph Stalin. And now Khrushchev has denounced him. Okay, there's more to it than that. China wanted to have nuclear weaponry, and Russia talked about helping them out, never did it. Okay, they always saw Chinese communism as a threat. Okay, on their border, even in the Cold War, they had more troops along the Amur River, the border of China and Russia, than they had in all of Eastern Europe facing the NATO forces. Okay, a lot of people don't realize that. All right, so there's a lot of things in here. 56. Also sees the Hungarian revolt. Hungary wants to take a different path to socialism. Okay, just as Khrushchev had said, Stalinism is not going to be applied. It starts as a student movement. They're marching through the streets of Budapest to the Congress Hall, and one of the guys marching was a friend of mine. I didn't know him at the time. Okay, all right, but he grew up across the street here in Manasquan. His name was Sandor Kovacs. I knew him as Sandy Kovacs. Coached his sons in hockey and baseball. Okay, all right. He fled in the midst of this Hungarian revolt at age 17. Never went back to Hungary. He actually did later on one time visit his dying mother, but he was never really allowed to go back in. Okay, at your age, folks, he's throwing Molotov cocktails at tanks in Budapest because that's what Churchill. That's what Khrushchev did. Khrushchev sent in the tanks, 2,500 of them. 150,000 ground troops to crush this rebellion. He said, no, we're not going to have this liberal movement in Eastern Europe. I want to hold on to those Eastern European bloc states. And that's what he's done. Hungarian revolt was crushed. It was an embarrassment to the United States. Why? Our Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, had said stupidly, hey, Hungarians, rise up in rebellion. We'll support you. How can we do that without starting World War III? So they rose up in rebellion expecting our help. It never came. Okay, well, 57 is a big event. Sputnik was launched. Now, what's Sputnik? That's that orbiting satellite. All it did was beep, go around the Earth, beep, 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 beep. But the Russians have beaten us into outer space. Okay, all right. This creates I remember this, creates a massive movement for science and technology improvement in elementary schools and high schools and things, because the Russians are better than us now. The Russians beat us into space in a lot of instances. They'll have the first cosmonaut in outer space too, Yuri Gagarin. All right, so at any rate, guys, okay, all right, this is Nikita Khrushchev now at his power, okay, 1957 through 59. Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago's published, wins a Nobel Prize. He's not allowed to go out and get it because there's things in there that are mildly critical of the Soviet system, okay? That's 58. Remember I said to you, though, you have a good option for a project here, okay? Get the movie Nicholas and Alexander. I've offered to send it to you. Get the movie Dr. Zhivago, watch them, review them. They're two classics in Russian history. Okay, you'll enjoy it. They're long, but you'll enjoy it, all right? At any rate, 1959, Nikita Khrushchev visits the United States. I remember this event too. He visited a Midwestern farmer and they talked shop, okay, about setting up wheat fields and things like that. Like Nikita Khrushchev is an expert on grain simply because he was born in the Ukraine. He was a son of a coal miner. He worked in the coal mines himself. He's not an expert on grain, okay, but at any rate, he was seen talking with a guy, okay, and the guy by the name of I love this name, Roswell Gorst, okay, all right, who's a farmer in Iowa or something, okay. More importantly, more to the point, okay, Khrushchev wanted to go visit Disneyland, okay, out in California. There was no Disney World down in Florida, but Disneyland out in California. State Department wouldn't let him go. They couldn't protect him, they said. Well, I don't know. Anyway, but you don't see Stalin doing this. Okay? Can you imagine Stalin want to visit the United States, want to visit Disneyland? Okay? Anyway. 1960, Sino-Soviet rift. Russia ends all assistance to Communist China. They don't get along. Kind of odd situation. Two major communist countries do not get along. That's what meant by the Sino-Soviet rift. All right? And the U-2 spy plane incident occurs. Now, this is an embarrassment. You talk about embarrassment to the United States. We weren't spying. We don't read the other fellow's mail, as a Secretary of State once said, Lansing. We don't do that, okay? Well, we were doing that, just like they were doing to us. But we would deny it whenever they said we were, they meaning the Russians. So what happens is we get a U-2 spy plane that's flying over Central Asia, actually over the Ural Mountains, investigating what was actually revealed later on to be a Soviet nuclear accident in a place called Chelyabinsk. Okay, that was not revealed to the world till after Chernobyl. Okay, but at any rate, it had a nuclear accident. They've had a couple of them. This plane's flying over, and it gets shot down. Well, the CIA knows that they've trained this pilot, and he's trained to take cyanide. He's dead. The plane disintegrates on impact, and there's no markings on it that indicates an American plane. Eisenhower calls in the CIA. They're accusing us of spying. Can I deny this? They said, sure. Pilot's dead, plane's disintegrated. Okay? He goes and denies it. Khrushchev calls a press conference. You deny it? I've got the pilot right here. He never crashed the plane. He never took the cyanide. Francis Gary Powers, okay, still alive. We're caught red-handed. We were spying. The rolls of film reveal that he's photographing sites over the Ukraine. It's just a total embarrassment. The U-2 spy plane incident was another episode in the Cold War. It puts a dent in something that Khrushchev had said earlier, something called peaceful coexistence. I made a passing reference to it a few minutes ago. What was that? Khrushchev had said, look, we don't have to have this military confrontation. We can have different ideologies, okay, communist and capitalist, but he said that coexistence is the continuation of the two social systems by peaceful means, without war, without interference of one state into the other. It is still a struggle, but it's a competition on a world scale, not a war, all right? So again, that image of the thaw, well, this puts a dent in it. They were scheduled to meet. 1961 would be the onset of John Kennedy's administration. Kennedy and Khrushchev, I'm sorry, let me back up. Eisenhower and Khrushchev were supposed to meet in a summit conference, and they don't meet. Later on, Kennedy and Khrushchev will. Well, we're up to 1961, all right, and a second Berlin crisis appears, and that's where they built that wall. That wall is going to be 500 miles when it's finally done, all right, and you'll get stories of people trying to escape from East Berlin or anywhere along that borderline into West Berlin to get out of the just deplorable conditions in communist East Europe. All right, they're fleeing to the west. I gave you the numbers earlier. Okay, all right, 4 million between 1945 and 1961. 1,000 or more were killed in escaping. They were tunneling under it, crashing trucks through the wall, flying over it, even ziplining over it. All right, things like this, whatever they could do to get out. All right, other numbers suggest that as many as 75,000 tried. 40,000 may have made it, but that's why they built this wall, to stop this hemorrhaging. All right. Later on, John Kennedy will go to West Berlin, and he'll have that famous speech, Ich bin ein Berliner. I too am a Berliner. I share your pain of what it's like to live, okay, in this, surrounded by a sea of communism. All right. Translate that sometime. Go to Google that and you'll find out he actually said, I am a jelly donut. It was a mispronunciation of Ein Berliner. Okay, all right. Don't worry about it. We know what he meant. Okay, that was it. 61 also sees, all right, I got 61 covered. 62 also sees the onset of really the highest point, the deepest point of the Cold War, and that is the Cuban Missile Crisis. I've given you some notes on that handout sheet. You got to read that, okay? But also, too, it was revealed by a U-2 spy plane, and those planes are amazing. I think we still use them today, okay? They could, from 30,000 feet, photograph the page of a book you're reading as you're sitting on the beach this summer. From 30,000 feet. They can get the text, okay? All right, the cameras are that sensitive. Well, they revealed that Russia was putting missiles in Cuba. Now, Cuba was communist under Fidel Castro, and Castro had wanted them there, right? Nikita said, okay, so no problem with it, all right? Well, the end of the day is that we have to get them out. Why? Because they're literally 90 miles off the coast of the United States, and now you have a situation. Communist, Soviet, Russian missiles are in Cuba with a strike time of 5 minutes away. They have first strike capability. Back up from that a second. When you have your big intercontinental ballistic missiles being launched from Siberia, and we have ours being launched from the Midwest, okay, there's going to be a 20-minute interval between each side hits their targets. 20 minutes. Gives you response time. They launch, we call them up saying, what's going on? Oh, nothing. Okay, I said, well, we find out you've launched. Okay, we'll launch now in response. World comes to an end. All right. Mutually assured destruction. 70% of the populations of both countries dead, okay, in a massive nuclear assault. This situation with the missiles in Cuba means that only 5 minutes away they can hit our missile silos before we can ever even respond. We think the Russians have about 1,700 nuclear warheads. They don't. Nikita Khrushchev can't keep up with that number the United States producing, and this is true because I heard his son speak it. I always go to the Princeton History Conference, and Sergei Khrushchev, Nikita Khrushchev's son, who's still alive, teaches history at Brown University, okay, said to an audience, a bunch of guys like me, okay, all right, like 500 of us sitting there. I wasn't anything special, okay, but a lot of us were my age, who lived through this Cold War era, hiding under our desks in nuclear drills, okay, all right, how many missiles did your father have, Sergei? And Sergei said he had 5. 5? Myself too, dropped my notebook, my pen, okay, 5. Yeah, this is how he kept up. He bluffed the United States. Other accounts go as high as 12. That's all he had. We were told every city in the United States had a missile aimed at it. Okay, we lived in fear of the Russians, and that's the Russia that Stalin created, and the Russia that Russian people today admire. Well, how's this going to play out? We could invade Cuba. That'd probably start World War III. Okay, end of the day, what happens is, you have some very good notes here, look them over, by Michael Dobbs, okay, who wrote a book, he spoke to as well, 1 Minute to Midnight. I've read the book, it's a great book, talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Look at point number 5, the intelligence that JFK did not know when he's formulating a response to this. He does a smart thing, he actually forms a blockade around Cuba, okay, all right, intercepting any ship coming in to see if they've got missiles. And this will ameliorate the situation. Back-channel deals also worked out too. We agreed to dismantle NATO missiles in Turkey, right on the border of Russia, in exchange for them taking out the missiles in Cuba, backed up by a promise the United States would not invade, and we've kept that promise. Well, how close are we to war? Watch the movie 13 Days. Okay, with Kevin Costner. That's a great movie. It really kind of sets the stage here, okay, in terms of how much we had here, in terms of nuclear weapon, how close we were to war. Between 1958 and 1960, U.S. stockpiles had tripled from 6,000 to 18,000 missiles. I said 1,800 before, I was wrong. We had 14 nuclear subs, each with 16 independently targeted nuclear warheads. We tripled our number of bombers and 6 times increased our number of intercontinental ballistic missiles. We're building up weapon systems you can't believe. So maybe that figure, $300 billion a year, is accurate. The Russians couldn't keep up. So what Nikita does is not only bluffing, make us think he's got more than he has, which is actually a good move, but also, too, he looks at the 4 components of Soviet defense. Ground troops, surface ship navy, submarines, and intercontinental ballistic missiles. And he says, look, I can't afford all 4 of them. I can't keep up with the United States. Scrap the first 2. Scrap the planes, the Strategic Air Force. Okay, scrap the surface ship navy. Emphasize the ground forces and the submarines. Okay, and the intercontinental ballistic missiles. I should have said 5. Okay, scrap the Air Force and scrap the surface ship navy. How do you think those admirals felt? How do you think those generals felt? Well, hold the thought. 1963, 62, let me stay with 62. Alexander Solzhenitsyn published the book, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which Nikita Khrushchev allows to be published. He had no problem with that. Okay, all right, because it was part of the anti-Stalin thing that he propagated. All right, great book, easy book to read for your book review. Okay, if you want to do that for a project. Well, grain failures start to hit in. The Virgin Lands program begins to turn to a dust bowl. Okay, all right. It looks like Khrushchev had backed down in the face of the Americans in the Cuban Missile Crisis. What did they do after that? Well, they did 2 things. Khrushchev and Kennedy. Okay, all right. They agreed to install a hotline between the Kremlin and the White House. It's a specially designated phone, and if it rings, pick it up. It's not the cable guy. It's the Soviet premier and the American president on one side or the other, and they're calling for a problem, all right, to solve a problem here, what's going on, whatever. That gets installed. They also agreed to limit nuclear testing, which is a very good thing. So both men took a step back here. Jackie Kennedy, after her husband died, later on wrote Nikita a letter. It said, "You and my husband were bigger men. It is the small men who start useless wars." She understood how close that Cuban Missile Crisis came to becoming a World War III. Well, grain failures, Cuban Missile Crisis, the Navy and the Army officers, the surface, the Air Force officers, etc. Okay, along with a party member who's ambitious by the name of Leonid Brezhnev. It is now 1964. Khrushchev's star has faded. Okay, he goes on vacation. Don't do that if you're a Soviet leader, because back in the Kremlin they vote him out of office, and Nikita quietly steps aside. Leonid Brezhnev is next up at bat. Khrushchev later said this, with pride: "Perhaps the most important thing I did was exactly that. They were able to get rid of me by voting. Stalin would have had them all arrested and shot." So it is 1964. Leonid Brezhnev is coming into power, and we'll see what he does to Russia and to Russian history next week. See you then. Okay, hit the red button.
I don't know, honey. I'll yell out upstairs to her.
Okay, I got it.